Hello, my name is Maria Davis-Perkins, and we welcome you to our first 3D Zoomcast, which is a question and answer session on reading and writing. I'd like to introduce you to my co-practitioner, Laura Chapman. Laura, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Hello everyone, I'm Laura Chapman. I am currently a special education teacher, I'm a resource specialist. My background has always been in reading, even when I was a general education teacher. I participated in projects throughout San Bernardino County for literacy, have been a teacher on assignment for early literacy, mentor teacher, and spent about 25 years in general education, teaching primary mostly and some upper grade. And then about 5 years ago, I decided that I wanted to get into special education because I had an interest in reading and students who struggle with it. And therefore, I got my master's degree in special education and am currently a resource specialist, as I said. I've been trained in Orton-Gillingham from the Institute of Multisensory Education. I've also been through the Wilson training, LIPS, and visualizing, verbalizing. I have a strong commitment and interest in the science of reading, and that is what frames my practitioner. So, hello.
Hi, okay, and I'm Maria Davis-Perkins. I'm a speech-language pathologist with a focus on literacy, and in particular on writing skills, primarily because when I was a high school English teacher and a speech therapist in the high school area, my kids were embarrassed by how they expressed themselves. So they were motivated to be more, I guess you would say, typical in terms of their writing skills, which by the way included both spelling and written expression, like for essays. I also have about 7 or 8 years as a medical speech pathologist with a lot of work with attention, memory issues. I assisted on setting up the Kaiser Permanente Cognitive Computer Lab at Kaiser Fontana, among many other projects. So we're happy to have you here today, and we will get started with a collection of questions that we have received. The first question, though, and Laura, this is to you. Could you define what science of reading is?
Yes, actually, it's a term used quite a bit right now, and it is just that. It's the science and what's behind it in how kids or adults, how anybody learns to read. It's more specified to students who struggle with reading and those that we would put into the arena of dyslexia. It's based on the simplified view of reading, which is very well known. I want to be sure I'm saying the person's name right, but G-O-U-G-H, Goff, was the originator of the simple view of reading. And just to simplify the simple view of reading is that it is based on looking at the outcome we want in reading, which is effective reading comprehension, and that it's made up of 2 components, linguistic skill and comprehension, linguistic comprehension, and word reading skill. And that's the simplified version. And of course, how that works, how that operates, what the brain does, what we need to do to get the brain, different parts of the brain activated, that is the science of reading. So it's the research behind what we should be doing as practitioners to teach reading.
Okay, thank you, because I wasn't clear on that when I've done some reading on the reading and development. So we're going to have Adam. Actually, that was a little preliminary. Sorry, Laura. We need Adam to explain that if there are any questions during the Zoomcast, there's a way of asking questions. So Adam, go ahead and explain that, please.
Sure. Anyone attending, if you'd like to have your questions answered during the session, you can enter your questions into the Zoom chat window. Depending on your screen layout, the chat button might be at the bottom or top of your screen. So click to open the chat, and then feel free to type any questions you have there, and we will read them when next available.
Okay, so we're going to ask Adam to be kind of our semi-commentator and direct questions to each of us. I will be focusing on writing skills, and Laura, of course, will be focusing on reading and possibly spelling. So Adam, you can go ahead and, since we seem to have more reading questions, why don't you start with the reading for Laura?
Mm-hmm. So the first question we have, they asked, my child stumbles when he reads. He's not a very fluent reader, even though he's in 5th grade. Why is he having trouble with being a fluent reader?
Well, if you look at what I was just talking about, the science of reading and the reasons behind fluency, and of course I don't know this child, so I don't know if there's a learning disability, if they have phonological processing deficits, if they have short-term, long-term memory issues, so that, you know, there could be a quazillion different reasons. But if this is a typical student and they are stumbling over words, not necessarily unable to decode, just reading at a slower pace, the reason might be threefold. First, it could be because they don't have enough practice reading, and that would be the one that we see quite often in families where children don't read quite very often. So that could be one. Another could be what is called it's called sight word reading, but I want to be sure we're clear on this. Sight word reading is just words we recognize right away. It is not certain kinds of words, like high frequency words. That's not what is meant by it. And this is going back to the science of reading. So if a child doesn't have it in their phonological memory, words, they are going to take longer when they see a word to either sound it out, which is very time consuming, or take a while to remember what is called the mapping of the word. So that could also slow down fluency. So overall, what we would want to do to build fluency is build the phonological processing for that child, as well as the rereading and reading of text often and as much as possible.
So you mentioned phonological, meaning that he doesn't have the sound sequence of that word in his head. When you say doesn't have the phonological memory, does that mean that he doesn't have that sound sequence stored in his head, the child?
Yes, it's not at sight yet for him. So let's say the word was cart, C-A-R-T, cart. He may not be familiar with A-R-R, and so he's looking at the word, he's going, and he may not be doing it verbally, he could be doing it in his head, and that's what the stumbling is. Could be, I'm guessing, could be. So if he doesn't have that mapped in his brain, he is going to be slower to process the information. So the more background we can give him, the less that would be so.
Okay. Okay, Adam, so you can tell me what the writing question is.
Okay. Our first writing question. My child writes in code. What I mean is that he doesn't write all the words in a sentence and uses capitals and periods intermittently. What's going on? How do I handle this? Here's an example. He's telling why fried chicken is his favorite food. And did you want me to try and read this?
If you can.
Kind of reading it phonetically. I love fried kispy when eat, love the way crunches in mouth.
Okay, so is there's lacking capitals and periods in that?
There's no punctuation, and there's a capital K for kispy.
Sounds like he's got spelling going on too. Okay, so let's for the moment, I'm not gonna address the spelling. I'm going to address why is he writing that way? Why are this in and out piece of wordage? So it sounds like he's thinking of something like I love fried chicken, but he doesn't say the word chicken, or he doesn't write it. It's so crispy and good. He's not putting in all the words. He's not writing them down. Now, the thing that could be going on with this child, and I have seen this with some of my kids too, is that he's getting what we call voice confusion. And I'm going to share a screen with you for a minute to show you kind of what that means. So let's see here. Here we go. Okay, so there's some research out that says that when we're thinking, we have this internal verbal stuff that we hear. So the brain is actually activating parts of the brain that we activate when we are actually listening to somebody from outside of our head, okay? Then we have that same inner voice when we read. Okay, so now we got this child who's trying to do it when he writes. Now, we have that inner voice when we think about the sentence. We have that inner voice when we read the sentence. And we have that inner voice in our heads when we write, talking to us. The problem here is that this child is probably getting all his inner voices confused. He's thinking it, he's looking down, he's seeing a word, he's thinking, here's that inner voice. So the two inner voices between thinking that what he wants to write, thinking those words, and seeing the words are getting mixed up. So when he puts that pencil down to paper, he's writing some of the words. So that kind of voice confusion, if you will, can be reduced by having him become aware of what he's doing or she is doing. So one way to do that for a few times is to have that student write a paragraph, but instead of writing the sentences side by side in a traditional paragraph form, have him write it in a list. What does that do? That allows that person to attend to the first part of the sentence, which means there goes a capital, and the end of the sentence, which means there's a period. The brain will start processing and reading and hearing when it sees the capital, and the reader's brain will stop hearing and so forth when he sees that period. And that's the same way for the writer. It's a better control of those different voices. He's not doing a quick and dirty, or quick and fast, I should say, same word, effort at writing, and it helps him pay attention better to what he does at the beginning of a sentence, what he does at the end. So if he practices list writing for a bit, maybe once a week, he'll become more aware of his actual writing at paragraph format. I've actually had a student who did this, and I showed him the first paragraph he wrote for me, and he looked at it and goes, that wasn't me. And actually it was him. But that's how dramatic a change it will make when you start controlling the attention a child has for what he sees, and also help him control that inner voice. So I would suggest trying to do that with your child, because it sounds like he definitely has some needs. Do we want to talk about the spelling? Laura, do you want to address why a child would have so many errors? I don't know if you've seen his love is L-U-V, crispy was K-I-S-P-E-E.
What is the age of the child?
It doesn't say. Oh, wait a minute. I have a copy of that question.
Yeah, Mr. Weschler just put it down here for me in the chat. So it depends on the developmental age of that child. If that's a kindergartner, that's excellent.
Yeah.
The child is hearing multiple sounds in a word. He's including vowels. He has crispy with 2 E's, which means he's very cognizant of long E sounds. So looking at that, I see a lot of positives. If that's a 9th grader, then it is somebody who does not have either a lot of experience with text, reading text, and or may have a phonological processing deficit, and therefore doesn't remember or doesn't map in his brain how words phonologically work. So therefore you would get spelling like that. So it just depends on the age and the development of the child.
Okay, so if it is, let's say a 5th grader, put him in the middle, would you be working on manipulating sounds?
My guess would be if the child's a 5th grader and is spelling like what we just saw, it's still not too far off actually, but what they need is a sequenced phonological program that they would be using in reading and in writing. So what they're in spelling. So what they're doing is they're learning the phonics in a systematic manner, and that in doing that in reading and learning to map words, they're going to be able to correspond that to their spelling. So it's going to do double if it's done in a systematic way for that child.
Okay. I noticed we just had a Paulette join us. Hi, Paulette. Can you hear us?
Hi, I can now.
Okay.
Oh, cool. I can hear you now.
Oh,
Yes.
great.
Thank you.
Nice to have you. This is our first experiment with 3D on a Zoomcast. Just quickly, Paulette, are you a parent,
Cool.
teacher, or what's your interest? I don't know if she heard me. Oh.
I'm a principal,
Oh,
so I'm interested in anything with reading.
okay. Well, you're in the right place. You may have missed a few minutes, but we're probably going to have this on our website as a recording. So stay tuned to that. In the meantime, we just finished a discussion of a child who writes like in code. Doesn't write all the words he's thinking.
I'll try to respond. You're cutting out on me, so I'm not hearing everything.
Okay, what I'm going to do is, because you have some background noise, I'm going to mute you. And when you have a question, you just type it into the chat room and we'll unmute you. Okay? Okay, here we go. There we go. All right. Hi. Okay, so I think our next question had to do with reading. Adam, you want to go ahead and direct that to Laura?
Mm-hmm. So our next question on reading. What are the best methods to use for teaching reading to a first grader? And what about a third grader or a fifth grader?
We're going to need to know, is it a typical developing child? If it's a typical developing child, what the research is telling us is 70 to 80% of those children are going to learn to read because they have the brain of a reader and they have the skill level that they're going to read with just good instruction in the classroom. However, if we're not talking about typical readers, if we're talking about children with phonological processing deficits, attention deficits, and short-term, long-term memory, rapid naming issues, any of those kinds of things who could have been identified as SLD, those children are going to need something very different. And that's where the science of reading is so important to our instruction, that we are using research-based systems in place for these students. The research is overwhelming that the brain can progress in children with dyslexia if we use these systematic programs. So if we're talking about a non-typical first grader with some kind of learning disability, we will start with, we will integrate phonological awareness and manipulation. Back in the day, we used to call it phonemic awareness, and that's the ability to hear sounds and put them together and take them apart. But now the research is indicating that that is not enough. We have to teach and instruct, especially these kids with learning disabilities, phonological manipulation. And that is where they not only can hear and blend and segment sounds, but they can manipulate the sounds. For instance, if I say the word plate, now say plate, but don't say t. That is causing their brain to manipulate the sounds without any visual cues, which then they are finding has a direct correlation to word memory and allows them to read and be able to manipulate and flex sounds in a very advanced way. So that's where we would start. We would definitely incorporate phonological
Whoa, we're freezing.
And phonemic awareness and move into phonological manipulation. We're freezing.
Well, your voice
I'm not
came out at a different time than yours. Okay, so if you were a mother at home Zoom casting, what would you tell them to do?
I would go to Facebook, Science of Reading, and there are so many different programs out there that are already written for you that could support you with that portion of it, the phonological manipulation. Hegarty is just a very well-known one. We would need to caution that we're not just doing the phonemic awareness, the phonological stuff separate from print. The research indicates that if you keep it separate from print, the progress in reading is minimal. So you have to include the print and the systematic phonics instruction to make that progress that we're talking about for those students with learning disabilities.
So one of the programs I've heard of is the E.O.P.S program from Linda Moubell. That does include the letters, the symbol along with the sounds, and sensory too. Okay. What about someone who's, I think there was another level, 5th grade. Is there a difference in how you would approach that for a struggling reader in 5th grade? What's the best method there?
Many of the children on our caseload are in that age range and have learning disabilities. And at the beginning of this year, I assessed them using what's called PAST. It's a PAST assessment. It is by David Kilpatrick, and it's for free. And it is very eye-opening. Students as old as 12 years old are unable to hear and manipulate sounds, and that is in direct correlation to their reading problems. So what I said for 1st graders would also be true for all the way up to any reader through adult who is struggling with reading. They need to have an assessment completed. The PAST is quick and easy. It's timed, which is another important part in figuring out the phonological processing of readers. And once you give them that and you score it, you're going to know right away where the issues are. And that's where you would start. And then, of course, a systematic phonics program to support that. That could be through OG, that could be through Wilson system. The LIPS program, they all have a definite, sequence to them and are very systematic.
Can I ask you a question based on my work with high school kids? I was working in a kind of a high-level SGC class where the kids were literate, and I was there and heard them reading, and many of them read not terribly. They weren't stumbling, but they were reading without expression. And they get the impression they really didn't know what they were reading. They weren't reading quickly, but they weren't reading severely slow. So what's the problem there?
That actually has a term. It's called hyperlexic. Oh. Hyperlexic children are children who have weak linguistic background. And so they sound fantastic usually when they read. And even some of them can read punctuation. But because they don't have the language background, what they're reading doesn't make any sense to them. And therefore, that their problem is in that linguistic section and not in the reading section.
Interestingly enough, only 3 of those kids had speech therapy because that was my caseload. But that's probably true because they were reading age appropriate literature. So I can see that. Okay, why don't we go to a writing question, Adam?
Mm-hmm. So our next writing question: how do I motivate my child to write? He hates writing in general, but especially when it comes to school assignments requiring him to write. He is in the 5th grade.
Okay, so there's a lot of questions to be answered, like, is it tough for him to do the handwriting aspect of writing? Or is he just bored with it? Or he doesn't see what he gets out of it? I really need to emphasize that when you're working with kids, it's so important for them to understand what they get out of it or what other people think about them when they write. So if he is giving you like minimal information when he writes paragraphs, he's giving you 2-sentence paragraphs, I would say something like, I'd read it and say, well, gee, if I were the reader who's really kind of your listener, because they're listening to you talk in this paragraph, I would think you weren't very interested in me only giving me 2 sentences. You have to give them the understanding that they're communicating. So I would say give him something he was interested in to write about to start, and make it fun. I don't care if it's putting in giving words to Spider-Man, make it a 2-character story. He might be more interested in narrative. He might be more interested in science. If he's interested in science, do an experiment, model how to write it, and then have him do another one and write about that. If he's a sports guy and he likes to skateboard, you might work with him on, first have him talk to you. That's our big thing. Have him tell you why he thinks skateboard should be a class in school. Okay, that's a good topic. It should be a PE class. And you just say, okay, think about it. Tell me why. And then you know, be a conversational partner, ask him questions so he can develop his ideas. You know, well, I don't believe you, to prove that's true, that kind of statement, and then have him write about it. Then the key there is to say to him and make sure he understands, okay, if I'm the reader and you're trying to persuade me about skateboarding and you write like this or you write like this, you write, well, I understand everything you say, your sentences make sense, I'm probably going to agree with you or at least think about it. But if you don't do that, and you can give an example of a jumbled sentence or something. If you write like that, I'm just like anybody else, I'll walk away, I won't listen. So if you really want someone to listen, you really want someone to do what you want, you need to make sense. And then you help him with how to do that. But it's always important to have him read out loud what he writes, hear how he writes, say, does that make sense? So that he can basically switch from that inner speech that we talked about earlier that happens when you write to the inner speech that you have when you're a reader. It's a different role, a different aspect of the brain that is activated, and it's so important to help the kids understand or hear their voice as a reader will. So always have him say out loud what he's writing. So kind of to summarize, give him interesting topics to him to write about. I have a part in one of my webinars that I talk about in writing conventions, how to assess a child's writing to figure out what to work on first, second, and third. Don't kill them with everything, but make it really important that when you're working on a particular writing skill, that you show him how that writing skill can hurt him or help him. So if he's writing like that last child did, I love fried crispy, you would read it out loud and say, wow, I don't get this. You think that person's going to buy you fried chicken? No. So you have to give him that that feedback, but it's so important that he develop that connection in his brain of being able to control his inner voice when he writes and be able to switch to that reader inner voice when he reads his writing so he can see how he's coming off. And then the third thing is, most importantly, to understand the impact that that writing has on the reader. If he does do a good job or if he does make it clear, and then what it's like when he doesn't. So it's about 4 aspects that are really important. So hopefully that will help. Okay. Go ahead, Adam.
So the next reading question we have is, what are pre-reading skills and how are they taught?
So pre-reading skills, just from my experience, what I would say is what happens in a home from 0 to 4, 5 years old. And it's language based, almost 100%. So conversation, experiences, building that linguistic part of reading comprehension that I talked about earlier. That goes a long way towards pre-reading skills. Reading to your children, of course, huge. So those are going to be the big ones. And of course, we know from research that students who do not have environments where that happens from 0 to 4 come in at a huge disadvantage into kindergarten or preschool. So those would be pre-reading skills up until school age. Once we get into preschool, then we're also talking about then letter sound recognition, phonemic awareness, hearing rhymes, blending sounds, segmenting sounds, and then the letter sound correspondence. So those would be some of the pre-reading skills that we would want to develop.
So if you're a parent and you have a preschooler and you're trying to get them ready for kindergarten, what would you suggest they do? Songs, stories?
From 0, not just preschool, from birth.
Well, yeah, I get that. But what I mean is if their child is going to be going into kindergarten or transitional preschool, just before that, there's all kinds of requirements in kindergarten, preschool now, I think. What would you suggest they focus on at that level?
Songs are good. Anything with rhyme, rhythm, it's going to build that phonemic awareness that I hit on before, that moves into the phonological manipulation. That's so important to being a good reader. So anything with rhyme, rhythm, song is going to be good. Any print, reading to your children, lots of print in your home, so that books are just a part of their life. They learn so much. They learn how print works. They learn that print holds meaning. They learn how to hold a book, how to turn the pages left to, I mean, there's just so much that children read just by reading. And if you want to, sure, you could start letter and sound recognition. I know some people want to teach their 3-year-olds how to read and all of that. And, you know,
Get fun.
you know, if the child is interested, that's one thing. You know, some children are very interested very young. And as long as the interest is there, I think that's, you know, that's fine. But if your child doesn't want to, then I would make it fun with singing and reading and just enjoying print together.
Okay. Adam, you want to go to the next writing question?
Sure. Next writing question we have. My child writes tangentially. He goes from one topic to the next and never really establishes a main idea to an essay or explains that one main idea. What do I do? He's in 7th grade.
Oh, I call that the write all that you can think of, Dad, because the more words you put on that paper, the higher your grade will be. Kids do that when they really don't have a method to the madness. Well, I'm going to plug our program because I do think it really helps struggling writers. What we do is we teach persuasive writing first. We're talking about kids from 5th and up. It's about appropriate to, I believe, the Common Core around 5th and 6th. And the reason we do that, it's the foundation for a lot more advanced writing as they pursue high school and college, research, even some of that is more persuasive than it would seem. So when you do that, you're teaching they call it text structure if you want to get into the research on it, or discourse structure, but ignoring that terminology. We're teaching them an organization and logic. And it's interesting because doing the Talk Right program and in our pilot, I always felt like I was teaching kids pragmatics. So this boy or child who writes tangentially doesn't really have a method. He doesn't know that he already has, for example, language skills he can tap into. Any child that tries to get $5 out of their parent to buy more popcorn at the movies knows how to persuade. You just have to show them how to use some of that skill to write, and then all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier. But most importantly, he needs to know, how can I persuade in writing? What do I have to do to get that person who's listening to me, listening to my writing when he reads me, how do I get that person to give me what I want, to believe what I believe? So once they have that purpose and they realize they've been walking around persuading everybody all day long, then you can help them tap into that that oral language skill that he does have. Even children who have been in my speech services are able to persuade to a certain level. And when I show them this program and when I walk them through the sequence and give them the how to do this aspect, they just eat it right up. So you need to give them a format and you need to give them a purpose for writing. That's a simple answer. And the third thing I would recommend is if he's in 5th grade, you can start working on persuasive and try to get him to persuade you. And then you get into the pragmatics of persuasion. You've got to give me your main point. You've got to give me reasons why I should believe you. You've got to prove those reasons are true, or I'm going to walk away and not do what you want me to do. Those are the kinds of things I do to help kids tap into the oral language synapses, if you will, connections. So I hope that helps with that answer to that question. Okay. Any questions from anybody else on that? Tangential? Okay. Go ahead and go for another reading question, Adam.
All right, so our next reading question. Why is my child having difficulty comprehending the text that he can read fluently?
Kind of what you said earlier.
Yeah, it's a hyperlexic student with linguistic difficulties.
Yeah, language. Does that happen, Lori? And when you're working with kids, do you see that with kids who have fairly, they're reading at a language level that you would expect, but they're still slow or still reading
Yeah.
fast but not understanding?
If you're talking about a true hyperlexic student, you're talking about somebody who says the words but doesn't have any cognition of what that means, or very little. And it is probably the hardest to teach, to instruct, because especially if they're already 6th grade and higher, because what's missing is the language. And so you have to go back to square one in developing their language skills. There is some correlation based on David Kilpatrick's book. He talks about this, and hyperlexics typically have a lower overall IQ as well, which is very interesting. So the language, the IQ may be impacting the language may be impacting the IQ, but it is a very difficult process. The program Visualizing, Verbalizing can be helpful with these students, because it helps them build pictures in their brain of what they're reading to visualize. But even that is going to be at a rudimentary level for these students. It will take longer than a typical student.
How common is that among the kids that you work with? And you're at elementary level, so.
Very uncommon. It's very rare.
Okay. All righty. And then what's another writing question?
So our next writing question: what do you do with a student who gives you 2-sentence paragraphs, usually full of non-specific words?
Okay. There's a couple of things going on there. It could be vocabulary. When I was working with English learners in Barstow, we did not at first try to read their papers up with better words, okay? What I would be more concerned about first would be how much information that child is giving me, even if it's in simple language. Right now, it's how much information, how much detail. You can say quite a lot without using complex vocabulary or very specific vocabulary. But what we did is we had them listen, we gave them models of not a very specific paragraph and one that was very specific. And what we pointed out to them was that there were a lot of items in the specific one, that words that told us who, where, what, when, how. Those were the things. And we went through and we underlined the words that told us those things in the good paragraph. And then we went to the not so good paragraph, which was 2 sentences long. And then we looked at that and said, oh, there's not much there, is there? Maybe 2 words here that give us that specific information, and maybe 10 over there. So what we tried to get across here is that you should be writing so that that reader can picture in his head what you are saying. So what did we do with that? What we did with that is we gave them a what we called coming up with good examples form. And so what they had to do is first they had to write some paragraphs. Actually, they were writing an essay. And we had to give them 2 techniques. One was to use names instead of he, she, it. And then also they had to ask themselves after every sentence, what happened next? What happened next? So they would hear from their partner, use names. What happened next? And then they would answer it verbally, and then they would write it. The partner would say, use names, what happened next? So they would answer the question verbally, and then they would write it. So what they developed was a very specific paragraph. Then when they were done with that, we had them use this good examples form. So we did, again, a partner situation. What we did is we had the partner read through, well, actually, we read through as a class one of the paragraphs that someone wrote. And I had them fill out this good examples form. Well, on the good examples form, it says, what's the thesis or what's the main idea? And they wrote that down. And then the students and I both checked out, as another student read the paragraph, how many what words were there? How many what happened words were there? How many, naming words were there? And so what we were looking at is how many specifics that student gave us. And then when we were done with that activity, I as a teacher and they as the students, we would compare our results. And if we were plus or minus a few, that was not important. But what this activity did was it made the students more aware of what kinds of specifics to put into their paragraphs and their essay. It also made them embed in their brains use names and what happened next, so that they're auditorily or in their minds, they have built up this step to producing a specific paragraph or a specific essay. So we found that helpful. So that's what I would say would be useful for a child who gives you 2-sentence paragraphs. And then the non-specific words, I would look at what kind of non-specific words he's using. If it's just to get, if you have him verbalize a paragraph, and that's what I do with some kids, they write a paragraph and it's on a topic or it has a main idea. And I say, okay, this is your main idea. And I put the paragraph away and said, now tell me about this. Just tell me about this. In your own words, I want you to give me the whole story, if it is a story, or the whole, tell me what happened in this example that made you think that. So they sit there and they talk and they talk and they talk. Okay, I'm listening for how specific are they when they talk, which gives me an idea of what kind of language they have or they can use when, you know, oral language. And then I'm also looking at that paragraph saying, are they the same? If he's being more specific when he talks, but he's not when he's writing, then he's rushing. And he may not enjoy that aspect of writing. Writing is not easy for any of us, okay? So if that's the case, then you want to assess him using that good examples form. You want to say, okay, you had a lot more than you had last time. I'll give you extra points for that or something like that. And then you can also point out that I really love this paragraph because I could see exactly what you meant, that you were talking about this red car that almost hit your sister and she fell into the trash can. And you know, I would give them a lot of positive feedback for improving, because kids want to succeed and you need to let them know when they have shown progress. So that's my 2 cents on that. Okay, and what's our next reading question?
All right, our next reading question. What is dyslexia and how does it impact reading progress?
How does it?
So actually the overarching definition of dyslexia is a reading problem. So it's really in of itself not very helpful. There's been a lot of research done, and I know in Kilpatrick talks about 4 different kinds of dyslexia. So the hyperlexia that we already talked about is a child who has poor linguistic but good word reading. And then we're talking about students who have poor word reading, but excellent linguistic skills. Those are the kids that are very enjoyable to work with because they learn to compensate because they have such knowledge that they try to compensate for their phonological issues. Then there's children who have weak both. They have weak language and weak word reading. And so it's just a combination of that linguistic and that word reading ability. Typically when we think of dyslexic, we're thinking of kids with word reading issues that if there's so many scans done nowadays of the brain where we can actually see what parts of the brain are engaged when reading and what parts are not. And that is a way now that we can see students that it can be identified dyslexia in that manner. Then as well, we can see comparison scans of what the student's brain looked like before intervention and what it looks like after intervention, and there are changes. If you are using a program that has the phonological manipulation that I talked about, as well as the systematic decoding skills taught in a sequential manner, and then adding to that word mapping, which I do have a slide that can kind of explain word mapping. But the question was just about dyslexia, so I'll save that. So overall, that is what dyslexia is. It's a reading problem. It could have different variations of language skill, different variations of word reading problems, and definitely is going to require extra support.
Okay, didn't dyslexia, wasn't previously just considered a problem with either auditory memory of sounds and being mixing those sounds up or mixing the letters up, the orthographic memory? Wasn't that kind of the point of view of dyslexia traditionally?
In the past, you know, back in the olden days, you used to say, oh, they're reversing their B's and D's and their
Yeah.
P's and their G's, and oh, they're dyslexic. And it actually has
Mm.
nothing to do with orthographic memory at all. It's a phonologically based issue.
So if a child is having difficulty with that, that's hard to discriminate from any other kiddo that's having phonological issues. So now any child who's having a problem is considered dyslexic?
Only if they meet certain criteria, then they would be labeled in special education as SLD. But there are it's a huge gamut. I mean, there could be children with very rudimentary forms of dyslexia, and if they have a supportive home environment, they've been read to from day one, you know, they're probably going to be okay, especially if they have good linguistic skills. But then we move more towards the middle, where those are going to be struggling readers that from day one, we can see that there's an issue, and then to very extreme cases that requires extreme intervention. So there's a gamut of what that dyslexia could look like.
The child that I have in mind was a high school student who was quite bright, but really couldn't read. I mean, maybe third grade if at the most. So with that kind of a kid, I mean, that's the stereotypical, you know, pretty good cognition, really poor reading, struggles twice the amount, has to do twice as much work as a regular student to be able to do his classwork. Takes a long period of time to do it. What do you do with that kind of kid? And that's a high school kid student. I know that's an older kid, but what would you suggest to parents who are trying to help him?
First thing I would do is get a hold of the PAST test, P-A-S-T.
Mm-hmm.
Google it, it's free, and it is a phonological manipulation assessment, and I would guarantee you that child is going to score very poorly. He probably cannot hear sounds, manipulate them, move sounds around. Therefore, his brain can't handle the workload of reading above the level he's reading. So what has to happen is he has to be taught. His brain has to be skilled in phonological manipulation, and therefore they would need to research it, but there are programs out there that deal exactly with that. And this is through adulthood. This is for illiterate people through adulthood. It doesn't matter what your age. And that's where you start. And then the phonics, systematic phonics is on top of that. Where we've gone wrong in the past is we thought, oh, we teach phonemic awareness, rhyming, at, mat. Okay, take mat apart, at, mat. Okay, you're done. No more phonemic needed. And that we're finding is that's not true, that they have to be able to manipulate in order to deal with the workload of what happens when we read, especially as the reading gets more difficult. So,
so they actually need more intensive intervention for that particular, the manipulation aspect. Yeah, I understand that. So if it were a high school student struggling, then you would encourage them to pursue those PAST, and also what was the other program you mentioned?
Well, that would be an assessment to tell you where they score.
Right.
Then, once you know that, you're going to look for a program that deals with that. Hegarty is one of them, H-E-G-G-E-R-T-Y. Personally, there's good and bad about that. Any program, there's going to be good and bad about it. What we have to be careful about is that we're not only doing manipulation skills in isolation, separate from print, especially when you're talking about older children. I have something I can show that can kind of show what we should be doing with them. So let me share my screen real quick.
Okay.
That allows us to do the manipulation while using print. Often what happens is we'll do these phonemic awareness manipulation things, say play without the ol, pay, and many of them can't do it, and you have to go all the way back to compound words. Say sunset, now say sunset without sun.
That's language helping.
Yeah, so what you're doing is you're having, for many people who really struggle with reading, you're having to go way back to that to build them back up to where they need to be able to read. And so if you're spending significant amount of time on that phonemic awareness part and never getting to the print, you're not going to see the payoff. So this is just an activity you can do with kids. Some people would call this word work. The difference between this and word work is this is targeted using very specific sounds and manipulation. So this is just an example. I have a group right now who's learning about the sound or. So I would start by saying, build the word pork. And so they would say, puh, or.
Laura, we don't see anything.
Oh. Okay, let me try this. Yes, this happens to me every day, all day long. You don't see it, Mrs. Sherman. That's because I switch it afterwards. Okay, can you see it now?
Oh, there we go, yeah.
Okay, so puh or k, and they would of course talk themselves through, is it a k, is it a k, c, or is it a ck, k? Well, let me think, Miss Chairman, I think we've learned blah, 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 blah. Okay, so once they get it, pork. Okay, now I want you to make pork say park. So what's happening is they're having to manipulate in their brain pork from park. What part do I take out? What part am I adding? So you're doing phonemic manipulation at the same time as using print. And that's going to give you more bang for your buck as far as, especially when you're talking about older kids where you need to move them very quick. And you continue with this, then adding blends at the end and the beginning, because again, that's where the kids who struggle with reading struggle the most. You might say, okay, make park say spark. Okay, make spark say sark. This is a nonsense word, kids. Don't worry. It's just a nonsense word. I always say it. And sark. And so every single time they manipulate or changing, their brains are having to really think and process the changing of the sounds. So this is the way to combine the phonological manipulation with print so that the kids are getting that practice while actually practicing the phonics, the systematic phonics that you're working on.
Laura, when talking about that high school student, that student has been through a lot of interventions all the years that he's been in school, and he still struggles. Why do you think that happened?
I would bet that his phonemic awareness stopped at blending and segmenting, which is what happened with most kids. They stop at about kinder, first grade. They say, okay, he can blend, he can segment, we're done. But what now the research is telling us is that's not enough. They have to be able to manipulate sounds in their mind to be able to deal with the workload that is involved in decoding longer words and reading more complex sentences.
Well, he was in special ed. So I know from being in special ed myself and working within the departments that not every RSP person has a good grounding in reading. They have so many different things they have to do. But he was in special ed and he was being pulled out quite a lot. You know how kids get in high school, they start to say, I don't want to go, or he wasn't that kind of kid. He was actually the kind of kid who would do everything he could to be able to do it. But, you know, is there something that should have been done?
Well, you know,
yeah, we're out of our hands.
Probably. And I would say that, you know, if I think of what I did 5 years ago compared to what I do now, because of the research that's been out in the last 5 to 10 years, it's very different. This summer, I just dedicated myself to really getting more up to date on the science of reading and what the new findings are, because I work with so many kids with dyslexia and I see some progress and but I'm not seeing, you know, the growth that I would want for them in their future. So I do see differences using some of this. The problem is it's in distance learning. So of course we're dealing with that.
It's harder. Yeah. But I like your manipulative squares with letters. Do you actually give the kids the controls so they can manipulate?
They have to, because if they aren't manipulating, then they're not doing it.
Yeah, they have to go through it. That's good. That's a process aspect. Okay, Adam, what do we have on the writing?
Our next writing question. My students hate to go back and edit their essays and writing products. What can I do?
Teach them so they don't have to do that very often. We ran into that in our pilot in Barstow. We didn't really run into it. They were following our lead. We had a great teacher. The program was really motivational. After all, they were going to get something out of it, meaning whatever they wanted when they wrote that essay, basically. But what we did was once we established that network, and it is a network that we're building in their brains, and I could go through the neural stuff if you want, but I'm going to kind of simplify here. When you establish a framework, a network in their brains for a certain, let's say, procedure, by the way, for special ed kids, kids who have learning disabilities, the one kind of memory that is really their strongest is called procedural memory. So how steps in doing something. So we established a procedural memory network for writing persuasive essays. Now, that forms as like spider web, right? So then when we had finished, we had like 4 different essays we were teaching them to write, and also all on the way teaching them the impact on the reader. But after I think we went through all the essays, and then we chose to work on what we call the conventions, which is some of those things that kids mess up or we mess up. Lack of punctuation, fragments run-ons, tense agreement, pronoun problems. And what we did is we looked at all the kids' essays and we said, well, these are the top 3 problems. So we grouped everybody. And what we did there, I think is very powerful. We went through a series of steps in each of our lessons. First, we showed, define the word, what's a tense? And time words. Okay, what happens if you go back and forth to the past and the present? Well, you're going to confuse your reader. They're not going to know if you're in the present or you're in the past, and they're not going to be happy because it's not clear. They're going to walk away from you. But we went through that through a series of activities. Then once they were able to flip tenses, let's say it's tenses, from past to present, present to future, basically knowing where they wanted to place the story, then we had them go to their essays. And we gave them this find and fix form, which we have on our website. And we said, you know what it looks like, you know what a tense error is, go through your essay, circle all the tense errors. And by the way, they got graded on this. And then I want you to fix them. So there's 2 ways. They can either rewrite the sentence on the find and fix the incorrect way and then write it the correct way. So why is this so powerful? First of all, they're not correcting a million things. We would work on that for 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, if we had the whole, the regular school year to work with it on, we'd work with that. I would look for improvement on that one aspect over that 2 or 3 weeks. So every kid will have their target, right? Every kid has their target. You look at how they improve on that target and you give them a grade for how they've improved. Right, but the key here is that they're always working on something they know is a problem for them. That's called student-centered approach. They know that you spent a few minutes telling them what it is they were working on and why. They know how to fix it. And then what happens is they become more aware of it. So over time, they don't make that mistake. But again, it's powerful because they're fixing their own writing and it's only one problem at a time. So when our writing conventions webinar, we talk about how to figure out what are those things that you target. What do you prioritize when you're looking at a student's writing? So I think there's a couple of powerful things here. Is one, you're teaching the effect on the reader, you're teaching them how to correct it, and they go right to their essay and they fix them up. And then they are graded on their improvement. I think those are all very powerful because the child, as we show that we have a tracking sheet that we used in the writing conventions webinar, the child is, or the student is actually seeing the numbers. They're seeing, I made this many mistakes on that first essay and now I'm making only maybe 2 out of 10. And by the way, that would be 80%, and I would say you're done. But that's the valuable thing about a student-centered approach. And if you, Paulette, if you have a chance to look at that webinar, you might send it to your teachers because I think it answers a lot of questions. But that's how I'd approach helping that student. I wouldn't hit them with everything. I would hit them with the most important things. And I don't mean hit them. I meant teach them. Okay, so do we have a reading question? Oh, we are at the end of our time. I'm sorry. So Paulette, let me unmute you. I'm sorry if we just had a lot of background noise there.
Yeah, and yeah, sorry, because I'm kind of babysitting.
Oh,
But
good.
you know what? This was really valuable information, and it kind of just affirms what's happening in our writing program,
Okay.
and also it gives me some more tools to help our parents who have children with different abilities as they navigate through, you know, their language and their writing and reading. So yeah, absolutely, this is good. You guys are really great.
Oh, that's
And
good news.
yeah, I want to know how I can follow you more. So I know you mentioned the webinar, so I can find that.
We have a Facebook page, and
You have,
yeah,
okay.
it's put out by the company 3D Educational Solutions. And like us on our Facebook page, you know, tell your teachers to check it out. The webinar for Building Confident Writers is there. We did that for the Dyslexia Society. We have our products are obviously available on the site, and there are videos showing a teacher instructing kids on these various things. So what writing program are you using?
Our writing program is I guess integrated with our reading program, which is
Okay.
it's Hoot Mifflin.
Okay.
And so we kind of use everything that's in their program for now. But we've been doing a lot of training, and most of our staff is new to that program. So we're learning. But a lot of things that you mentioned are good things, and some of the things that I see the teachers actually doing.
Good.
So I know we're on the right track, and it's good. So any
Okay.
information is powerful.
Okay, well, if you ever need any help, let us know. We'll come out and talk to them. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending today. Thank you, Laura, for your input and your research-backed comments. That's it, and we'll be saying goodbye, and we hope to hear from you again, Paulette. Okay, bye.